This week, I would estimate that there were maybe 25 things that I forgot to do. There were probably 125 things I should have done but didn't, and at least a dozen things that I did do incorrectly. That wasn't staged. Never mind the many more things that I hopefully did right or remembered to accomplish. Maybe that there weren't actually that many things that went wrong, but as usual, my mind inevitably focused on the mistakes. Perhaps you can relate to this feeling, that even if we do 99 things right out of 100, our minds can't help but dwell on the one place where we missed the mark. I think it's normal. Apparently you can relate too. Especially when we are culturally predisposed to insist on achievement, and when the rat race of life in New York City demands being the best. Pulling the curtain back a little bit, I'll tell you that the multifaceted job description of clergy sets us up for many opportunities to make mistakes. We're simultaneously teachers and guides and party planners, custodians, comedians, and accountants. Jacks of all trades and masters of, hopefully, Torah, but, it's tricky business. And let's not forget, we're also human beings, clearly. Brains and bodies with frailties and faults, just like everybody else. And as we read this week, Jewish clergy have struggled to hold it all together since the beginning of our history. Parshat Shmini describes the installation of the very first Jewish clergy and the first sacrifices of the priesthood. On the 8th day, Shmini, Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. Vayomer el Aharon, and he said to Aaron, Kach lecha egel ben bakar lechatat. Take a calf of the herd for a sin offering. They bring the things that Moses had commanded, and the whole community stands there in front of the tent of meeting. And Moses turns directly to Aaron, his brother and newly minted high priest, and says, Krav el hamizbeach, come close to the altar, and sacrifice your sin offering and your burnt offering, atoning for yourself and for the people. Aaron steps gingerly forth, drawing closer to the altar. And Moses prods him forward, telling him that the animal he must sacrifice is an egel, a calf. Now think for a moment. I'm sure that you can remember that a few weeks ago, Aaron played a very different role in the life of the people. When Moses was up on Mount Sinai and the rest of Israelites convinced him to fashion an idol in the form of an egel, in the form of a calf made of gold. The connection between these two episodes is not lost on our rabbis, who point out that the sin offering could have been anything. Earlier, the instructions list a sheep or a goat or perhaps turtle doves or even simply flour. But for Aaron, it had to be a calf, a physical symbol of his prior mistake. The Eitz Chaim Torah commentary explains that Aaron had to be urged to bring his purification offering because he was embarrassed by the memory of his role in fashioning the golden calf. The Midrash adds that at this moment, Aaron was filled with dread. As he started to make his offering, nothing divine was seemingly happening, so he became convinced that this was all his fault because he had sinned so grievously with the golden calf. Another Midrash teaches that Aaron was so distressed that he began to hallucinate. As Ramban explains, Aaron imagined that the altar itself had become a bull, which frightened him. According to Ramban, Aaron was so hard on himself that his famous mistake remained top of mind for him all the time. For that reason, Moses had to say to him, Krav el hamizbeach, get close to the altar. As if to say, don't be so worried, don't be so hard on yourself, you have a job to do. In the ensuing verses, Aaron does indeed complete his task. According to tradition, Aaron's ability to sacrifice this egel allowed him to move through his trauma of having sinned with an egel previously, and he was able to move forward. It's a happy epilogue to the emotional drama of Aaron and the golden calf. Aaron and the people are forgiven. But I think it's notable that our tradition offers so many stories about Aaron's mental well-being as he considered both his role and his human imperfections. You don't have to be a spiritual leader to relate to having standards for yourself, which you sometimes fail to meet. Many of us encounter scenarios where we have to face our shortcomings, and it's never comfortable. Perhaps, like Aaron, when we think about the ways in which we didn't behave as the best versions of ourselves, we too might kind of hallucinate. We might invent stories in our heads about how others perceive us, convinced that others look down on us or are still thinking about that thing we did or didn't do. It's only natural. As Eitz Chaim also teaches, the ability to feel shame is one of the defining characteristics of a moral human being. It arises from an awareness of the gap between who we are and who we might be. But even if Aaron is able to confront his mistakes and move through them, perhaps we too should treat ourselves with a little more grace and compassion. Perhaps we too should forgive ourselves the way our tradition urges us to forgive others when they mess up. It seems by the end of the chapter that Aaron is able to do exactly this. But that isn't the end of the parsha. In the next chapter, a tragedy unfolds. Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, take their fire pans and offer an Eish Zarah, an alien fire, which God did not command. Immediately, a different fire comes forth from God to consume Nadav and Avihu, and they die then and there. One can only imagine how devastated Aaron must have been, and how guilty he might have felt as a parent and role model. In the Torah text itself, Moses doesn't come across as especially compassionate. He essentially says to Aaron, "This is what not to do." And Aaron responds in silence. Modern readers would be right to question Moses in this moment after the intensity of what his brother had just endured. He doesn't seem to respond with brotherly love. But he says one thing that stands out given the reading of Aaron's mental state earlier. He says to Aaron and his remaining sons, "Umi petach ohel moed lo tetzeu." Do not leave the tent of meeting. The reason he gives is that leaving would constitute yet another infraction against God, which might incur God's wrath upon them as well. But Rabbi Aviva Richman offers a different take, which moved me to offer this teaching this week. She writes that when Moses tells Aaron and his sons to stay inside the Mishkan, it conveys that these deaths are not a sign of rejection or punishment. Rather, God wants to hold Aaron close, even in these tragic circumstances. Lest he think it was all his fault, Moses insists that Aaron must keep moving ahead, trying to get close to God. Perhaps then Moses' response to his brother actually was compassionate and loving. Perhaps he realized that Aaron would blame himself yet again and want out. So Moses encouraged him yet again to stay in. Leadership is filled with opportunities to make mistakes. So is parenthood and relationships and work and pretty much everything else that we spend our time doing. And it is hard to stay committed to these things when we know that we have made mistakes. It is natural to want an out when we aren't quite performing our level best. And it is all too human to ruminate on prior mistakes and invent stories about others' perception that make us feel even worse, as if the best alternative is to give up or flee, especially when something truly terrible happens. But still, like Aaron, frequently the right decision really is to stay inside, to push ourselves to try again and confront the ways in which we've made mistakes in the past, and simply to try our best. When we see a vision of ourselves and how we want to be, sometimes we have to stay inside the tent, even when our shame and trauma urge us not to, even when we feel very far away from that vision of who we want to be. Chances are we can get close. Shabbat shalom.